I will just go ahead and begin with introductions and allow people time to still log on. My name is Savannah Lane. I am the Executive Director of the Turkish Heritage Organization, and today we have a conversation on the global and regional impacts of COVID-19 on maritime affairs. We've obviously seen an impact on many different industries and sectors, and the maritime affairs are not exempt from that. So I am very eager to hear from both Admiral Roughead and Admiral Gordeniz to share different perspectives. I will let you all know, as I mentioned, this recording will be available later today on our website at www.turkheritage.org. And just a little bit of an introduction of THO for those who are not familiar with us. THO is a nonpartisan nonprofit founded in 2015. We focus on US-Turkey relations, the NATO alliance, and analyzing the latest developments in foreign policy and foreign affairs. We're very excited to invite you to participate with us in our Q&A, our chat. Hopefully we will have time to incorporate your questions, but go ahead and while we are beginning our introductions and our moderated session of the panel today, you can go into the Q&A and type your question, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of them to the best of our ability with time allowing. I want to just dive quickly into introductions with our admirals. I will say that the entire bulk of our webinar could be spent talking about their experiences, and it was quite a treat for myself to hear behind the scenes their past experiences shared. But I'll begin with Admiral Gordeniz. Cem Gordeniz, graduating from the Turkish Naval Academy, began his career of service when he assumed command of guided missile frigates in the 3rd Destroyer Division. Admiral Gordeniz holds 2 master's degrees in personal management and international politics from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate, and Admiral Gordeniz served as the Chief of Strategy and Agreements Department before becoming head of the Plans and Policy Division in the Turkish Naval Forces headquarters. Following his retirement in 2012, Admiral Gordeniz founded the Istanbul Koç University Maritime Forum, and as the current director of the forum, Admiral Gordeniz is committed to training expert personnel in the fields of maritime law and politics and organizing open dialogues to contribute to the development of Turkish maritime law and international awareness. So Admiral Gordeniz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
And next, we also have Admiral Gary Roughead. Admiral Roughead is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He became the 29th Chief of Naval Operations in September of 2007 after holding 6 operational commands. And he's one of only 2 officers in the history of the Navy to have commanded both the U.S. Atlantic and Pacific fleets. He served as the Commandant of the U.S. Naval Academy, during which time he led the strategic planning efforts that underpinned that institution's first capital campaign. And he was also the Navy's Chief of Legislative Affairs, responsible for the Department of Navy's interactions with Congress, and the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Pacific Command during the massive relief effort following the 2004 tsunami in Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. Admiral Roughead is a recipient of numerous awards, and again, I could go on for both of them during the entire webinar if we were going to read all of their introductions. But we're very excited to have both of their perspectives shared today. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just dive right into the questions. And again, I encourage you all to join us in the Q&A if you have questions following our first conversations. So Admiral Gordeniz, I'm going to turn it to you. The Mediterranean is obviously a critical maritime and commercial route. Can you speak on what vulnerabilities it faces in the light of COVID-19 and what's being done to strengthen the route's resilience during this time?
Yeah, the Mediterranean is for centuries, throughout the human history, became the center of the merchant trafficking and also the cradle of civilization. And so right now encompassing 21 states, more than 430 million population. It's a very active, very dynamic area for not only for the economics, but the world politics too. But on the other hand, we are talking about the 1.7% of the overall ocean. So in fact, it's a very small sea area, but we are seeing that 20% of the world shipping, merchant shipping crossing this area. It's uniting the Turkish Straits, the Danube region, Caucasus region, and then Suez region, Levant and North Africa and Gibraltar and the northern shores of the Mediterranean. So yes, it is very vital because of Gibraltar, Suez Canal and Turkish Straits. And every day in Turkish Straits, we see 150 ships crossing the Turkish Straits. Mainly the Russian import and export traffic is very dependent on it, because we can say 60% maybe Russian export-import traffic goes through the Turkish Straits and Aegean Sea. On the other hand, in Suez, we are seeing 50 ships every day, and Gibraltar more than 170 ships. So COVID-19, I think COVID-19, yes, in a bit affected, but we have to see the overall global picture first. Sea transportation or the cargo carried over the seas decreased only 5%. It didn't affect too much other than cruise ships, passenger ships, and some sort of course, at the peak period, the container ships. And therefore, I would say the COVID-19 has created a negative effects for the marine industry in the Mediterranean littorals. For some countries, we can say, for Spain, France, Italy, yes, they suffered. But again, not that much. They continue to operate for vital commodities and vital requirements of their economy. But Croatia, for instance, suffered. But on the other hand, if you look at the Greece, for instance, Piraeus, they increased. I checked why the Greece, port calls are increased. I found out that because of the One Belt, One Road, BRI of China, because Piraeus right now is the opening gate for the BRI to the European markets. And therefore, I think despite the COVID-19, Piraeus became one of the leading ports. On the other hand, what are the major, let's say, negative effects other than COVID-19? I would say, unfortunately, the illegal migration and illegal plus, of course, refugee flow, because illegal migration is different than refugee flow. But both are very active. In yesterday, west of Rhodes Island, a boat capsized and 80 people were on board. Can you imagine? A very small boat. And so every day, unfortunately, we are seeing and contemplating this very, very tragic human incidents, human tragedies. And so I think the number one problem is saving the human lives in the Mediterranean Sea. On the other hand, of course, the civil war in Libya and Syria are the other two important, let's say, two important areas of conflict which have a spillover effect over the Mediterranean Sea, especially these warring factions utilizes the weapons that might be effective over the seas. We have seen in 2006 in Lebanon, for instance, and also there are dangerous incidents took place in Libya as well, in the approaches of Misrata and other port cities. And lastly, I would say that the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean stemming from the Greeks and Greek Cypriots demands over the Turkish maritime jurisdiction areas limitations, and that also the causing the major, let's say, frictions in the area. But I don't think that friction, the last one, might cause a major, let's say, problem in the area, because of the Greece and Turkey are still the NATO members, and Greek Cypriots, if they are not supported by or provocated by some nations, I'm sure that this issue can be solved peacefully. These are the things that I can say for my part.
Thank you, Admiral. And I really appreciate you adding that humanizing aspect of what we're seeing right now. Of course, it's critical to also focus on that and seeing the migration and, of course, migration of refugees as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Now, Admiral Rafet, I want to turn to you and get the U.S. perspective. Obviously, not necessarily either of you representing the Navy from your respective countries, but of course, we want to gain that perspective. In the wake of COVID-19, how has the U.S. Navy and its role in the maritime industry readdressed its strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, well, I think that Admiral Gurdonez gave a great overview of the Med and some of the challenges there, and I think it was important to highlight, what's happening in the maritime commercial space, because after all, the seas are the conveyor belts of the global economy. There have been some changes. Clearly, as he pointed out, cruise industry is in a bit of a hold right now. I think that one of the things that is not recognized, and unfortunately in the U.S., a lot of notoriety was given to the episode of our aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt in the Pacific, And that's where the focus appeared to be. But during that entire time, our submarines were out globally. Our battle groups were operating globally. We had multiple carrier operations going. And what it showed me was that the Navy has been able to adjust to be able to look out for the welfare, not just of the sailors on the ships, but also, we also have to keep in mind that for every sailor, there are a lot of families ashore as well. And so how our Navy has dealt with that, monitored health, monitored the combat readiness of ships, I think has been very positive. And we've learned a lot. I think there likely have been some slowdowns in some of the exercises that allow navies to come together and operate. Clearly, we are going to be much more cautious on what I refer to as the diplomatic nature of navies, where they go into ports, interact with people, have professional exchanges. That's been slowed down, and I would expect until we get through the phase that we're in now with COVID and get to vaccines, things like that it'll slow down. I take a little bit of a different view on some of the activity in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm worried about it. In the United States, it's hard to get people to think of what I call the Maritime Middle East. For 2 decades, we have been engaged in ground wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when you talk to the American people, they think in terms of the Middle East always in a land war, when the Maritime Middle East is extraordinarily important. Not just the Persian Gulf area, where there's potential conflict with Iran and some of the Gulf states, the importance of the sea lanes in the Red Sea, which feed into the Mediterranean and feed out of the Mediterranean, and that critical strait around Yemen, the Bab el-Mandeb. And so I think it's important, and one of the reasons why I appreciate you hosting this program is that we need to start talking more about the Maritime Middle East, because it really is critical. In my own view, I think we have not spent enough time talking about the Eastern Mediterranean. It's a place of great interest. The Admiral gave an overview and he referred to how important the Mediterranean has been over the years. I like to use the term, I think it comes from biblical times, where people referred to the Mediterranean as the Great Sea. As a young boy, I lived in Libya for many years, and to me, the Mediterranean was has become very personal as well. And I think some of the things that are happening there, the tensions that the Admiral touched on, the finds of gas, and how countries are now beginning to think about not just their own claims, but how, if you develop those gas fields, what are the pipeline politics to get the gas to markets? That is really quite concerning. From the maritime standpoint, I would also say that the claims that Turkey has registered, now Greece has registered, are beginning almost in a maritime sense to cut the Mediterranean in half. And I think that that's something that, at least in the United States, we need to have more awareness about. We need to talk more about it. And we need to look for solutions to not allow some of these frictions to become hotter and hotter and break out into conflict, even if it's just because of a mistake or a misstep.
Thank you, Admiral. And we will be definitely following up on some more with the Eastern Mediterranean. You hit the nail on the head in that it is obviously something that we are all continuing to watch. But I would be remiss, Admiral Gordeniz, if I didn't turn to you and ask about the Black Sea. Following the recent discovery of energy resources, natural gas in the Black Sea, Turkish President Erdogan affirmed that Turkey entered, quote, a new era. How could this discovery, according to your perspective, of course, challenge the current maritime affairs that we're seeing and Turkey's relation with regional powers like Russia, Iran, and of course the US?
Yes, in fact, the finding of the gas deposits reservoir in the Black Sea, for me, it was not a surprise. It was expected, because we know that the Black Sea is an accumulation of the long years, of hydrocarbons are expected, especially the gas hydrates. we knew that gas hydrates are so rich in the Black Sea, so it was not a surprise. But surprise for me because it was I was not expecting such a big area, 326 billion cubic meters. But after I spoke a couple of my friends in the business, and they said that that might extend it because they found a very nice, let's say, source. What might be the effect of this over Turkey's economy? It is enough for just of today's number, 320 billion cubic meters. It's enough for 6 years, but we are talking about more than 6 years, and therefore it's a good start. And you know, I am the name giver to the blue homeland. I coined the term in 2006, and when people ask me, what do you think about this finding? And I say, blue homeland gives the first reward to Turkish nation because they waited for a long years, for a million years. These deposits were waiting to be introduced to Turkish people. So that was this generation's time. And in 3 years, the president says 3 years, so 2 years time, but I don't expect that should be that be possible, and therefore I expect 2025, 5 years time, that gas might be reached to the people. But on the other hand, that doesn't give the full spectrum of energy independence to Turkey. That doesn't give, and therefore Turkey should continue research, Black Sea as well as in the Mediterranean Sea, whether or not that find can affect the issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. For me, that shouldn't be affecting because this is a different sea area. And that should, does it affect the Turkish-Russian relations or Turkish-US relations? I don't think that might be a great, let's say, effect over the relations of Turkey with other states, because Turkey should act, this is my idea, should act based on the interest, not the eternal friendships, eternal hostilities, because every nation has eternal interests. If the interests are overlapping, why not? Right now there are Turkish Stream and there are Blue Stream pipelines crossing over under the Black Sea. Right now Turkey imported the gas from Russia in the last year as the minimum level, because already importing much more from Azerbaijan, little bit Iran, and Russia is not in the number one anymore. But it wouldn't affect the Turkish-Russian relations in the future. To the contrary, maybe these pipelines can be utilized with the integration of other pipelines in Turkey to extend the gas from Azerbaijan, from Russia, to even maybe in the future the Israeli gas can be connected to the already existing infrastructure of gas in the Anatolian Peninsula and Thrace Peninsula to reach the Europe, and that might serve to the humanity. And on the other hand, Turkish-US relationship, I don't think that this irrelevant issue for US-Turkish relations. Right now, these relations are sailing in different directions, especially focused on the Syria, Libya, and Eastern Mediterranean. And I don't think the Black Sea finding might any effect over the US-Turkish relationship. But the Eastern Mediterranean issue definitely should not be affected from such findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. And Admiral Roughead, I do want to give you time to respond to that and the Black Sea discovery, but I want to reference something that you recently wrote in Foreign Policy magazine, and you were discussing the US withdrawal from the Middle East and the Mediterranean routes, and how this would create a new equilibrium with Russia and China at its core. In a post-COVID-19 era, should we expect a change relating to this equilibrium that you discussed from the US, especially as it relates to foreign policy in the maritime issues?
Yeah, I don't think that COVID in itself is going to cause the change, but I do think it will be the trade considerations, the economic considerations, and the frictions that might arise from those that would potentially some political drama and that could lead to some contentious relationships in the Mediterranean, in the broader Mediterranean, and how does the U.S. respond to those? I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that even though there have been a lot of gas finds, a lot of how that gas is going to be developed, and I know our viewers, listeners are well aware of this, will depend on the economics. What is the price of gas that makes it worthwhile for companies to want to go in? What are the consequences of gas fields that are developed and exploited that then take other sources of gas or make other sources of gas less attractive? And does that cause a political outcome? So I think, there'll be some slowdowns, but I think the trends are going to continue. How long will the world rely on gas before shifting over to alternative forms? I know, everyone is always eager to get to the more green world, but, gas is going to be a bridging source of energy, I think, for quite some time, probably to the 40s, 50s. That's something, Savannah, you'll have to worry about. I'll be long gone by then. But I think we have to look at the economics. And one of the things I think that is important as people look at the maritime space, economies are so important, and understanding the economics really, I think, begin to give you the indicators of how things may play out in the future.
Thank you, Admiral. Now, Admiral Gordonez, I'm going to just take a quick audience question because I think it relates earlier to what you were discussing with Eastern Med. This is a question from Dr. Mark Merowitz, who is a professor at SUNY Maritime College, also a member of the THO Advisory Board. And he wants to ask you if you believe that within the Eastern Mediterranean issues, can this be solved without further addressing the question of Cyprus?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you very much. Yes, the Cyprus is the biggest thorn in the Eastern Mediterranean area, because Turkish government, for a long time, doesn't recognize the Republic of Cyprus. And therefore, in order to talk in a diplomatic table about the Eastern Mediterranean delimitation issues or maritime jurisdiction areas, first the Cyprus issue should be resolved. And therefore, I think in the coming October, there will be election in the TRNC, Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and the new government will decide the future of the negotiation. I personally strongly advocate the idea that the establishment of the two independent states, it is the best solution. Otherwise, we are going to wait for next 40 years for resolving this issue. And I'm looking at the 1974 and 2020 timeframe. There is no bloodshed. There is no civil war. No Greeks, no Turks killing each other. So I think it's the best way to separate the identity. On the other hand, if you look at the Greek Cypriots unilateral declaration of the EEZ in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 2nd April 2004, it's a large area. In fact, they use the median line, considering themselves as a continental state, not an island. And therefore, it's again an issue between Turkey and the Greek Cypriots. And they issued this EEZ without asking a single question to the TRNC. In fact, they became the EU member in 2004, representing the whole island. So there is a very mixed, very complicated issues involved in here. I don't think that might lead to any armed conflict, but this tug of war will continue. On the other hand, their declaration of area, it was based on the infamous Seville University map. It appeared after the year 2000. We were shocked when I was the Chief Plans and Policy Division. I was shocked to see the map, because it was excluding Turkey from the Eastern Mediterranean because of Castellorosi, or Maize Island of Greece, because of the Kassos, Karpathos, Crete, and Rhodes chain of islands. And because of the Cyprus, they were almost grasping 150,000 square kilometers from Turkey's deserved continental shelf, which is not totally acceptable. And then we issued a couple notes, but after which they were insisted, and 2007 they issued licenses on these areas. So that was the beginning of the major conflict between Greek Cypriots and Turkey. Nowadays, as you are aware that the Turkey, after the striking the agreement between the Libya on 27 November 2019, things got worsened. And I am sure in the future, the community, EU, including some senators and some circles in United States, start to understand Turkey's geopolitical necessities. I am not saying objectives, necessities, because with this map, they said that Turkey should follow the international law, but this map is totally against international law, totally against the decision of ICJ, the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Can you imagine that small island of Castellorosi in 10 kilometers periphery versus the Turkey's 1,700 kilometer periphery getting 4,000 times bigger share from the Anatolia, 40,000 square kilometers. It's unacceptable, of course. It's against the international law of the UNCLOS procedures. And therefore, I consider this issue not only energy-wise. Energy, as Admiral Rafet has said, that maybe 50 years' time, there will be no hydrocarbons we are talking about, all right? But geopolitics, the exclusion of Turkey, the Anatolian Peninsula from the Mediterranean Sea, this is the main issue. And therefore, today's struggle, I think the energy is a secondary role, but the exclusion of Turkey from the Aegean Sea, if you look at the Seville map, it excludes Turkey from the Aegean Sea as well. Today, the Greek government announced that they extended territorial waters in the Ionian Sea to the 12 nautical mile. Okay, all right, they can do that. But if in the Aegean, if they do that, Turkish ships cannot reach the Mediterranean Sea without entering the Greek's territorial waters. And this is, of course, sort of Turkey's strangulation of Turkey. And therefore, I urge our viewers here that they should look at the issue with the Turkish perspective as well. Because I know I lived 7 years in the United States. I know Greek lobby is so strong and Hellenism is so strong, but they have to consider the Turkey's geopolitical necessities, not objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Now I'm going to just return to Admiral Roughhead here, and we've discussed this, but I want to dive a little deeper here. With this ongoing pandemic, of course, foreign policy, geopolitics, those developments have still continued. And we are watching closely to see what is unfolding in the Mediterranean between Greece, between Turkey, Egypt, other NATO nations. According to your perspective, what role, if any, should the position of the US be in this conflict?
Well, I think, one, I'm not going to call it a conflict.
Sure.
But I think that the absence of a more robust U.S. presence and a more focused approach to the maritime issues in the Mediterranean, and also I would include the greater maritime Middle East, I think is not helped. We need in the United States to think about that. We need to make people more aware of what's going on. I think the maritime space in the Mediterranean is going to change, as the Admiral mentioned. One cannot not think of any body of water around Eurasia without taking into account China's Belt and Road and what China is doing, and what some of the second, third order effects are, whether it's the port of Piraeus or in Spain. That's going to change trade. It's going to change economies. I would also argue that we will likely see a digital Silk Road overlay on top of where the physical structures are being put in place. And I think that the United States not having a more robust presence, not paying more attention to NATO and the activities that are going on is not helpful. I also think that what we're also beginning to see is walking away, or the erosion of some agreements that were put in place. Obviously, I spent a large part of my career, particularly the latter part of my career, in the Pacific. I continue to stay focused on US-China issues. And what I see in the South China Sea, the way that we're looking at the Eastern Mediterranean, the competing claims, I think that we're not paying proper attention to how those issues become resolved. I also fear that without a more sophisticated approach on the part of the U.S. toward the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, it will be easy to say, well, this is all about gas. It's really not all about gas, as the Admiral pointed out. I mean, there are some significant political issues here that we need to understand, that we need to play a role in trying to resolve the differences so that we can avoid potential conflicts.
Thank you, Admiral. And certainly it is so much deeper than what is right on the surface, of course. Now, Admiral Gordonez, I think we still have a few more time for moderated questions before addressing the rest of the audience questions. We've discussed the security aspect and security angle of maritime affairs, but I want to turn more commercial, and you hinted at this earlier. But what might we expect in terms of the Mediterranean long-term effects of COVID on supply chains? Obviously, this is a critical part. So are we going to expect any changes? Are we seeing similar status quo to be returning soon, or will we expect something drastic?
I think the nations has found a modus vivendi by the requirements of the natural life and the human survival. And therefore, yes, we have seen the decrease in the container ships, for instance, container numbers. Why? Because people during the lockdown stayed at home. They didn't consume too much. And we have seen the increase in, for instance, internal markets, the price of the private cars. Why? Because people didn't want to go to the public transportation. But on the other hand, we have seen the decrease in the vehicle transporters in the overall world merchant trafficking. There are connections between those two developments. But on the other hand, yes, the normal life, I think, shall continue in terms of nutrition, in terms of energy, in terms of the basic requirements of human life. But on the other hand, luxurious requirements like cruise ships, for instance, maybe till 2022, we cannot see it, because people will wait and see what's happening if the vaccine comes, or if not. It's a risky business, and therefore I don't think that there might be a major, let's say, hurdles or major cutbacks in the merchant trafficking or maritime industry. But in Turkey, for instance, I checked this morning the number of the port calls, number of the cargo handled in the Turkish ports. There is no such a big decrease. I'm talking about only 5 or 10% in some ports. But on the other hand, because of the COVID, I think the most affected area was the maritime tourism, sea tourism, especially in the Aegean coast and the Mediterranean coast. Because of the COVID, there is a restrictions on the travel, and mainly the EU imposed that restriction against Turkey. It's related, I think, with the Eastern Mediterranean question. For instance, the EU opened all the visas, lifted all the restrictions within the EU borders, but they didn't lift the restriction for Turkey, and therefore Turkish yachtmen, Turkish tourists didn't go this year to Aegean Islands, and that was a loss for Greeks as well. But on the other hand, Turkish internal domestic tourists are increasing in our coastline. But again, for the lack of foreign tourists coming to Turkey, it's a major, let's say, setback. But on the other hand, for the shipyards and the ship industry, still the constructions are going on, not affected. For the Navy, for instance, Admiral Rafet mentioned about Theodore Roosevelt. I follow the issues very closely, and the Turkish Navy did a great job this year. More than 6 months from the beginning of the COVID-19 till today, there was no incident happened in the Turkish combatant warships. In couple ships in the shipyard, yes, it's of course because they are daily trafficking. But in the combatant ships, they used from the beginning very, very astute isolation measures, and they were very successful, especially in the for the continuation of the operation in Eastern Mediterranean. And therefore, in sum, I would say I don't see that this COVID-19 would affect very drastically to the maritime industry in the Mediterranean Sea.
Thank you.
If I could just call in on that, I agree that we likely won't see drastic changes. I think there may be some volume adjustments that take place. There's at least in the United States, this idea that we're going to reshore a lot of our supply chain. Great ambition, but I think that's going to be hard, especially as you're trying to recover the economy. Are you willing to spend that extra amount? Are you willing to incur higher costs because of changes in labor rates and things like that? So I think that there'll be a lot of talk about it. I think there may be some areas where perhaps in the medical area that's those chains are tweaked up. But when you look at, where the workshop of the world is in China, and you survey many of the companies that are there, I think the most recent survey I saw was that 87% of the companies in China said they have no desire to move. So I think that we'll see volume numbers changing, but I'm not betting in the near term that we're going to see massive shifts in supply chains that are going to move on the ocean.
Well, it's definitely a cautious optimism. I hope that you both are correct in those predictions. And I want to stick with you, Admiral Roughead, and turn to China a little more. We had an audience question asking, what might the United States stance be against the increasing aggressive actions in China in the South China Sea?
Well, I think you're seeing in the last couple of years more U.S. activity. I believe that it's also becoming more apparent that some of the other countries are beginning to push back a bit more. I do not see the U.S. Backing down on how it views China's claims in the South China Sea. I do think China may begin to push a bit more aggressively, given the fact that there may be a perception that the U.S. is distracted and now is the time to move. But it's also very clear that over the years, China has increased its capability, has increased the capacity, has reorganized its maritime forces, and you can't think of Chinese maritime forces just as the People's Liberation Army Navy, as they call it.
Right.
But you have to take into account its Coast Guard, its maritime militia. The installations that they've now built up on those features in the South China Sea are militarily significant. China will say they're not military bases, but they do provide great logistics points. One can question why you need a 10,000-foot runway in the middle of the South China Sea if it's not for military purposes. I know the Chinese have said they expect tourism to flourish there. Not a lot of beachfront in which to enjoy. And I also think that particularly as China talks about this concept called a transparent ocean, one can expect more sensors to be going in place there. And it really is, the Admiral mentioned how critical some of the sea lanes are in the Mediterranean. The sea lane that goes through the South China Sea is the sea lane that really drives the global economy.
Thank you. And Admiral Gurdunis, I believe this question wasn't necessarily addressed to you, but you might be able to shed some light. This is from an audience member. Would it be possible for Turkey to find IOCs as a partner in the Black Sea while under pressure from the EU and US due to the East Mediterranean disputes?
IOC, I didn't understand that part.
It's IOCs. I maybe if the audience member can type in, I assumed was just the Intergovernmental Oceanic Commission of UNESCO, but if he has a different acronym, maybe we could have him type in and return back to that.
Can you repeat the question, please? I didn't understand.
Sure. The question is, Oh, yes, we have some clarification here from some audience members. Thank you. So would it be possible for Turkey to find IOCs, and they wrote international oil companies. So would it be possible for international oil companies to find some sort of headway or partnership in the Black Sea while under pressure during the East Mediterranean disputes?
Oh yes, definitely. I am sure that they can find, because thanks to Montreux Convention, thanks to stability and the ongoing peace in the Black Sea domain, that this area I think is very proper for future investments compared to the Eastern Mediterranean, because right now we have no single issue with the Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia, or Russia in terms of delimitation, because we already concluded in 1982 the Continental Shelf Agreement, in 87 the EEZ, and also after the demise of the Soviet Union, this agreement also, this delimitation also recognized by the other littorals. So this is an area with no, let's say, conflict of interest of anybody, and therefore I think it's open. And Chevron was the partner of TPAO until 2013. 2010 they signed an agreement, but in 2013 Chevron thought that this area is not resourceful, and they withdrew from the agreement. I'm sure TPAO, maybe Turkish Petroleum Company, might find partners from abroad, mainly from not only on states, but there are many other countries who is specialized in drilling oil in the sea base.
Thank you, Admiral Gordonez. And unfortunately, we are coming up on our time here today, but I do want to leave time for both of our esteemed guests to have some closing remarks. So Admiral Roughead, if you have any last thoughts or comments that you would like to follow up on, I would like to just give this time to you now.
Well, great. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to share thoughts throughout. And I really enjoyed, sharing with Admiral Gordonez. I think it's so important that, at least in the United States, we begin to look at the region and look at the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean with a maritime lens. For centuries, indeed for millennia, the Mediterranean has been that great sea that I talked about in the beginning. And I think that we take for granted what happens on the oceans and the sea lanes and the vital choke points and the contentious issues that develop between nations, particularly as there's wealth under the water in ways that didn't exist, even decades ago. And I think it's important for the United States to really begin to look again toward the Middle East with that different lens, to become more involved in maritime matters, and to really develop maritime strategies and policies that quite frankly, we have not been doing. As a matter of public record, I'm a long and continuing voice in the importance of the United States to become party to the Convention on the Law of the Sea. I think our absence there allows activities to take place, and the U.S. is not in a position to be able to bring parties together in a way that I think the convention legitimizes. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and I encourage your organization and other organizations to really begin to think deeply about maritime issues and not just look at the superficial frictions that may be developing over symptoms and not causes.
Thank you, Admiral. And Admiral Gordonez, any last thoughts or comments that you would like to share with our audience today?
Yes, and since the audience is so much interested in what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I would like to make my closing remarks based on the Eastern Mediterranean issues. The Eastern Mediterranean issue as a geopolitical perspective consists of three intertwined or clashing interests. First, energy geopolitics. Second, rimland geopolitics. This is so important for the future of the new world order. Rimland and energy, and the third, Israeli security or defense geopolitics. These three things are right now intertwined each other, and therefore it creates such a, let's say, a complicated situation. So we should look at each issue differently. On the other hand, Turkey has become a major state, like 85 million people, G20 member state, and 70% of the defense industry right now can support its armed forces, and also very experienced armed forces. Since 1984, you know, we've been fighting with the PKK, and also very active navy involved in the 3 different area of operations. And therefore, Turkey should be seen not a bon pour l'Orient perspective. I know from the old years, you know, people used to think that, okay, Turkey, you know, these are land people, they are not maritimized people, and therefore we've been seeing for many years, and therefore this civil map is produced, and to keep us to the Anatolia, to exclude us from the Aegean Sea and from the Mediterranean Sea. But the new generations, especially the young generations, are very aware of the new geopolitics. And therefore, I advise American decision makers, because no problem with American people. Turkish people loves American people. But the American state and decision makers should see Turkey with different glasses, and also they have to think about to become an honest broker once again. But right now we cannot see United States as an honest broker. A couple hours ago, the Philip Riekers, the Deputy Undersecretary for the Department of State, and he wrote a letter to Hellenic Association in Washington, D.C. It's full of threats to Turkey, full of embargo threats, sanction threats. Even there are some NGOs and some think tanks in United States thinking to use American firepower against Turkey. You know, can you imagine that if the United States and Turkey worked together during the Cold War? Turkey, you know, burdened the maximum, let's say, burden of the protection of the southern flank with more than 600,000 soldiers, and right now some think tanks and some people are thinking that way. This is not related with the internal politics of Turkey. You might love or hate the Turkish government, or like Democrats and Republicans struggle within the United States. But this is not an issue of Turkey's internal politics. This can continue in the future despite a change in the government, because this is geopolitics. And therefore people should understand the Turkey's geopolitical necessities in order to survive, in order to continue the Republic's life into the future. These are my closing remarks. And thank you, Admiral Rafet. It was great pleasure and honor to talk with you after 9 years later over again, the digital environment. Thank you.
Exactly. We were ahead of our time.
Certainly. Well, Admiral Rafet, Admiral Gordonez, thank you both so much for joining us today. Again, I want to remind our audience that they can visit this full recording and more of our upcoming events at www.turkheritage.org. Thank you all so much for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.